and welcome to another edition of the Tag1 Team Talk, the vlog and podcast of Tag1 Consulting. I'm Michael Meyers, the Managing Director at Tag1, and we're here today to talk about and celebrate 20 years of Drupal. Tag1's really proud to have been part of Drupal's history since the earliest days, and we thought it would be great to sit down with some of our team members that have been in the community for a really long time to get their unique perspective and insight as to how Drupal grew and what it was like to be a part of that growth. I'm joined today by Greg, one of our senior infrastructure engineers. Greg, could you just quickly introduce yourself, say hello to everybody, and talk a little bit about some of the areas that you've been involved in Drupal over the years?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Greg Lund-Chaix. I have been in the Drupal community since about 2006, so right around the Drupal 5 era. I've been involved primarily with infrastructure. I'm primarily a sysadmin and infrastructure engineer. So almost all of my work with Drupal has been with the infrastructure and security teams in the Drupal community.
Awesome. I thought it would be great to sit down with you, Greg, because of that perspective. We've talked to a lot of people that are involved in the code side of Drupal. I think people need to hear more about, running a Drupal website and what it was like to scale Drupal as a platform. And, websites like, Pfizer or companies like Pfizer and all their websites wouldn't be using Drupal today if it didn't have those infrastructure capabilities as well. So it's not just software. Drupal is made up of many components. Do you remember how you first came into contact with Drupal or discovered it and what you were doing with it?
Yeah, I pretty much my first week on the job when I started at the OSU Open Source Lab, the first project that got handed to me was the migration of the OSL's own website, which was a mixture of Plone and some Drupal 4, I think. And we had to upgrade it into Drupal 5. And so I got completely, as a non-developer and sysadmin, I got thrown into trying to figure out what the hell this Drupal thing was and how did I make it go. And this was maybe a couple of months after Drupal.org got flown into Corvallis on a private plane. That happened just before I started. So this was all a very new thing, both at the OSL and even newer to me. And so I just had to kind of dive in and kind of grope around and figure out what the heck I was looking at. So that was getting thrown in the deep end pretty early on.
There are people that discovered Drupal because they needed to solve a problem, and there are people that were thrust at Drupal and were,
yes.
Indoctrinated by fire. And for those who don't know, the OSU OSL is the Oregon State University Open Source Labs, and they host well over 100 open source projects, including the Python foundations and stuff for Apache, OpenStreetMaps, so many awesome
For a while,
projects.
kernel.org.
Yeah, it's amazing what they do. So we know that you're not a quote unquote, like software developer, but have you made any contributions to Drupal that you are particularly proud of?
So I don't know if I may be the longest term involved person in the Drupal community to never have a commit show up anywhere. You can search the entirety of the Git logs anywhere in the Drupal community and you will probably never see my name, because the vast majority of the work that I did was with the infrastructure team. And that, as often as not, was something as, analog as physically lifting a server or, moving cables around or, wiring up a router or something like that. So a whole lot of my work in the Drupal community had to do with the literally physical infrastructure of Drupal.org, which of course is never going to show up in a Git commit anywhere. So yeah, we learned a lot.
There aren't going to be any Git commits if that infrastructure ain't running. So
no, exactly. That too. Yeah. So, it's one of those things where we were all kind of groping around in the dark, learning how to do large scale Drupal when nobody had done it before. And so, we leaned on each other a lot, and we all learned a lot from each other at that time. And, I still use a lot of those lessons that I learned, 15 years ago in managing the Drupal systems I manage today.
And you did mention when we were chatting earlier about the Varnish VCL. So, I don't know if that's code per se,
True.
configuration, so.
Yeah. So I think I was the first production use of the Varnish module back when it first came out, when Josh that was way before Pantheon existed, when Josh Koenig released it. And I think I released the VCL config for Varnish that I used to get going on a project I was working for the state of Oregon, the Department of Education. And Josh scooped that up, included it in the docs for the Varnish module. And I haven't looked, in several years, but the last time I looked, that code was still sitting up there. So that's as close as you're ever going to get, probably, to see any code that I actually wrote for the Drupal community. I know it's probably not going to show on a commit anywhere, but my name was at least on the module page for quite some time.
There are many different ways to contribute to Drupal that aren't code.
Yep.
So that's very important.
Yep. Right. And actually, that's one of the things that I like to discuss with. I tend to go to the newcomer social back when we had DrupalCons in person. Well, it was one of my favorite things to do is for the first timer social that they usually have the first night, is to go talk to folks that have never been to a DrupalCon before or are new to Drupal. First of all, because it's a great way to meet people, but also I think it's a great way for me to tell, to be a living example of this is how you can, here I've contributed to Drupal for 15 years and don't have a single Git commit out there. There are so many different ways you can contribute, whether it means showing up at a first time social, or whether it means, doing a config for, reverse proxy cache. There are a ton of different ways you can contribute.
I love the first timer social. I think that I've always wanted them to have like a buddy system or a mentor system where
that'd be awesome.
If it's your first DrupalCon or you're new to Drupal, you can check a box that says like assign me a buddy, and people that want to mentor or help them, would get paired up, because when when we first got involved in Drupal, the community was really small.
It was.
It was really easy to meet, key contributors. It was very easy to know what was going on. Now, it's just crazy. It's so hard. And so it's awesome that you're doing the first time socials. I think, a big part of Drupal is the community. So my favorite question, what is your favorite and least favorite features or aspects of Drupal?
And of course, now I'm drawing a complete blank.
Brutal.
Put me on the spot. So my favorite part is absolutely the community and the people. I mean, I know it's trite. I know that we all talk about it, and it's kind of, it gets hammered away. Excuse me, I have a cat in my face. It gets hammered away at every keynote where, it's all about the community, but it really is. I mean, I live back when we had DrupalCons in person. I loved going to DrupalCon, not to go to the sessions, although the sessions are all excellent, but I can watch those afterward, but to actually sit down in the hallway and just catch up with people and learn what people are doing and meet the first timers, and make new friends. And that is probably the thing that I found most valuable. And it's something that I think is not necessarily unique to the Drupal community, but one of the things that makes it special. Because when I was at the OSL, I was there for 8 years. I got involved with a lot of open source communities and saw the different characters of the communities and what they're like, the kernel community and the Apache community and the Python community. And they all have their benefits. They're all wonderful people, but there's something special about the way the Drupal community works and how we all interact with each other. And it's the reason I'm still here. It's the reason I'm at Tag1. It's the community.
Yeah, there's definitely something special. I agree. I can't put my finger on it. Everybody is so open and welcoming, and there's just so many good people that want to do good, and they're a pleasure to be around. And it's good to remember that not every open source project is like that, and how good that we have it as members of the community. All right, least favorite feature or aspect of Drupal. Seems like you're stalling on that one.
I am, and I'm trying to Composer. So, and this is not a, I mean, and that's a reach, right? But I'm not a developer, right? So I don't work with Drupal code any more than plopping it on a server and making sure it runs well. So for me, the thing I find the most frustration in dealing with Drupal is having to deal with Composer in a production environment where I'm dealing with deployment, because it's a pain. It's annoying. Having to do all these workarounds with committing artifacts to a Git repo in a separate branch or a separate repo, stuff like that, is just annoying as all get out. And so I think that for me is probably the most annoying and frustrating thing. And I understand why it's there. I understand how it benefits developers. But from the ops side of the world, oh God, it's a pain in my keister.
If you had a magic wand and could wave it and make anything happen, what would you do with Drupal?
Okay, well, I might get in trouble with Jeremy on this one, because I know this is something that we do here at Tag1. But I would love to magically upgrade all those Drupal 5, 6, and 7 sites up to at least Drupal 8. We're an LTS provider, I know. So that's that's one of our business models, right? So I'd be waving my magic wand to destroy a branch of our business, but.
Well, just think how profitable we'd be if we could upgrade all of these sites.
Yeah, we'll just charge them all for it, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I just worked on a Drupal 6 site this week. Drupal 6 is still out there. It's still live. It's still in production. There's nothing technically wrong with it. And, from a performance standpoint, it's actually quite good. But, that's something that there's a lot of technical debt floating around out in there in the community. And it's something I see so often when I'm doing migrations, or we get called in to help when there's an incident on a site, either a scaling incident or a security incident or something like that. And we look at the site and we realize it hasn't been updated in 7 years. Yeah. And so I would love to magically just make that all go away.
It is astounding. I don't think people realize this, how many Drupal 6 sites are still out there and running.
Yeah.
As extended support or long-term, service provider, we have a really unique perspective into that. But we still have clients coming to us and saying, "Oh, by the way, I have a Drupal 6 site and we haven't secured it, and I need to get it secure. Can you help me?" So the fact that one, there's still tens of thousands of sites out there running it, and hundreds working with us, and people still coming to us and finding it blows my mind every time it happens. And like I said, it's still, for a lot of people, it's a great platform. It's great that you don't have to upgrade if you can't. Some organizations just don't want to invest the money, or it just doesn't make sense. It's not cost effective, but they want to keep the site running, maximize that investment.
Yep.
So it's cool that they're able to do that. We always say the same thing with Drupal 7. It's going to be around for another 7 years.
Long time.
Yeah, definitely. So,
and it's funny
closing,
too, because I just want to add one little thing right on that one, and it's really funny because I do a lot of migrations, and what we get called in a lot on audits and things like that. People are always embarrassed. They come to me and say, "Oh gosh, my site's a mess. We haven't touched it in years." And they're always embarrassed about something that isn't, the site's working, it's stable, and so I always try to flatten that embarrassment a little bit. But yeah, people are so embarrassed, and it's okay, really. I've seen far worse than this.
Yeah, there's no reason to shut it down if it meets your needs. All right, in closing, I know that there are a lot of people along the way that have helped us and gotten us to where we are. But if you think back to the very beginning, when you first got involved, is there someone in particular that stands out that you want to say thank you for helping me get started. You made a huge difference in.
Yeah, so I think, and this is going to sound a little bit funny considering I still work with him, but I think I want to call out Narayan Newton, because he was at the time still a student at OSU when I joined the OSL. And he and I and the others that worked on the original infrastructure, Jeff included, a lot of what we did was we're kind of feeling our way through in the dark, figuring out how to do this stuff. And his creativity and brilliance really helped me, because I'd been thrown into this with no experience at all, and he had a few months ahead of me. And so, he helped me figure out what the hell's going on and what I'm looking at. And, here I am, 15 years later, still working with him, still doing exactly the same thing, where it's like, hey, I'm thinking, is this a crazy idea? Bounce ideas off of him. And so, and he's a lifelong friend at this point. He's family.
Narayan's amazing, truly brilliant. And I have this memory in my head of Narayan, like early on when I met him. I forget where we were, but we were in a talk with one of the founders of MySQL. Maybe it was even MariaDB then. It was like one of their top engineers, that was core to the company. And Narayan got up and asked a question. It was a really small forum, and Narayan's like, so I read through the source code, and I have a question about,
yep.
And everyone was just like, wait, what do you mean you read through the source code? Narayan just doesn't, use, databases and stuff like that. He pours through them and really understands them. He's
absolutely
insane. I love it. So on that note, Greg, thank you so much. It was awesome to catch up. These conversations are so much fun for me to just, go down a trip down memory lane and to hear what memories others have as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back soon with another Tag1 Team Talk.
See you later.
Awesome. Brilliant. We're done, June. Thank you, June. No edits, June. Oh, June's going to love us. This is, I think.
My degree's in broadcasting. So, this is, it's only I'm usually the one behind the camera.